Okay, so thanks everyone for joining us today. Welcome to our first Digital Fortress webinar of 2024. And today we're going to provide some practical tips based on our real experiences across Mishcon. A bit of housekeeping first of all. If you've got any questions, please put them in the Q&A function, not the chat function, and we'll try and address them at the end. And if you've got any technical difficulties, please put them in the chat function. And if you want to get in contact with any of us directly, then click on the resources tab down below and you'll be taken to our bios and contact details. There will be a recording at the end of the session for everyone who's signed up. So thanks for joining. In today's webinar, we're going to delve into the world of incident response and its pivotal role in preventing or minimizing the impacts of cyber incidents. So in a world where cyber attacks are becoming increasingly sophisticated and frequent, having a good and robust incident response plan is more crucial than ever. So we're going to explore some of the facets of incident response, from readiness and response to post-incident activities and the role of threat intelligence. And we'll hear from experts across Mishcon who will share their insights on cyber incidents and discuss how incident response strategies are evolving to meet these challenges. Thank you for joining us. Right, so my name's Mark Tibbs. I'm one of the partners here at our complex investigations and cybersecurity practice. I'm going to turn to Francisco, seeing as he's our primary expert on incident response, to introduce himself and the rest of the panel. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, everybody. My name is Francisco Sanches, and I'm the Cyber Risk and Complex Investigation Director in charge of our consulting, digital forensics, and incident response services. Emily?
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Francis. I'm a lawyer in the data team at Mishcon, working on all things data protection, including advising on ways to prevent breaches and taking action when a breach occurs.
And last but not least, Joe.
Thank you very much, Mark. Hi, I'm Joe Hancock, everyone. I'm a non-lawyer partner in the team, and I specialise in the crisis management and incident response side of our practice.
Great. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Lots of experience in the room, in the virtual room. So let's jump straight into it. Francisco, can you just tell me about the typical shortcomings observed in companies' cyber incident response plans and how these can be addressed?
Sure. So common situations we found with some of clients was they would have an incident response plan, some of them even quite drafted, but they just never really tried to apply it to an incident or to use it. And so people were either unprepared or the expectations of the plan were unrealistic for their organization. Other situations, common pitfalls, would include that when activating an incident response retainer like ourselves, there would be a huge lack of understanding or documentation about the environment itself, and that really delays the ability to respond because people just had all the knowledge in their heads and there was a lack of minimum set of documented information about their environment. Other bits was when incident response plans are drafted without aligning with known and recognized frameworks like NIST or SANS. On top of that, some of them would fail to link up with regulatory bodies that have built and provide the guidelines for organization security. And this is a lost opportunity of making sure that they align with the compliance needs that those regulators put out there. And they could have significant financial implications if they're not considered during the development of these incident response plans. Two others that come to mind would be drafting a more technical plan in isolation. You cannot have it in isolation. If you have, for instance, a managed SOC supplier or another IT provider, you need to make sure your plan involves all the relevant parties and links up with them in a meaningful, actionable way, so that it can be of use and can be acted quickly. Comes to mind, just 2 months ago, we had another situation with a client that faced an incident and called us to investigate. Now, they detected the situation, but the situation had happened roughly 1 month ago, and they did have an incident response plan, and they did have rather good security in place. However, all their security logging with an adequate level of detail only gave them 7 days back. So that really restricted on how much we could understand and find out of what was happening. So.
Right. So to sum it up, it sounds like planning is really, really important in the incident response planning part of
Definitely.
part of the process. Yeah. Okay. So thanks very much for that, Francisco. Emily, how about you're one of our GDPR and data protection experts. So how about GDPR compliance? What can you talk us through how you've helped clients prepare during their incident response sort of planning parts of their planning from a GDPR perspective?
Absolutely. So one of the key things that the UK regulator, data protection, who's the ICO, looks for is that you have a clear policy in place that covers what to do if a data protection breach happens. One of the most helpful parts of this policy that we see is to have a clear reporting procedure. So normally most people in an organisation won't be the go-to for dealing with a breach. So what they need to know is who to contact both internally, so contacts like their IT team, legal teams, if you've got in-house legal, and also then who those teams need to turn to externally. So that could be providers if the breach was actually caused by a provider, insurers, and also external legal counsel if you have them to hand. And then exactly as Francisco said about you might have a procedure in place, but it might not actually be tested for a breach if it were to come up. So one of the ways that we help clients to prepare from a more practical perspective is to run a kind of tabletop mock data breach training exercise, which is very much designed to create a safe space for the team to test out how they can respond to any issues, identify any gaps in reporting lines. And that way, if a breach does happen, they know that they've had that space to test out how they can respond confidently.
So tell me a little bit more about that, Emily. Is that sort of like simulated kind of desktop exercise where everyone gets a bit of information and it's high pressure, and you find out how people react under pressure to these kind of like a developing situation?
Yeah, exactly that. So we'll set it up something along the lines of at 10 a.m. you get just a query from a customer saying maybe I can't log into your platform or I've received this odd email. And then we can escalate it to say perhaps an hour later, you actually get an email from a threat actor to say we've accessed your systems. And what we're really looking for is that everyone within the business knows that you're not jumping to say, let the regulator know straight away or telling all customers, but instead you're contacting someone like your head of IT, like in-house legal, if you've got in-house legal, so that they can then make the decision of actually, where are we with our knowledge? Who do we need to reach out to? And they can make that assessment about what to do next.
Yeah, I understand. We've done a few of those ourselves, and fun in practice, fun when you're practicing, not so fun in real life is what I've worked out from that. Okay, so moving on past the sort of planning stages of incident response, let's talk about we've got Joe Hancock, our partner in our complex investigations and cyber risk practice here, who's dealt with a lot of crises, incidents, cyber incidents in particular. Joe, what level of communications should organizations prepare for, and how when thinking about an incident, a cyber incident?
Yeah, no, thanks, Mark. I mean, the first point to make is that I always tend to defer these things to our reputation protection team, who are, what they do day in, day out. But I think Emily made a really good point, which is that kind of, communication needs to be planned, managed, and thought through. You don't want a knee-jerk reaction. So, incident happens, let's notify everybody in the world that we've had a problem. Those kind of things, it just could not actually be what it looks like on the tin. Incidents, when you first get them, are always kind of a bit grey. It's a bit ambiguous, not really quite sure what's going on. So there's a tendency, often people's instinct is to over communicate, especially with the information commissioner, where they have this 72-hour clock ticking in the back of their minds because they've been to an unhelpful presentation by someone that's told them about that. I'm sure Emily can talk about that in a minute. But the key thing for me is making sure that communications is part of that plan. And we're all going to say the same kind of thing today, which is plan, 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 plan. Because if you fail to plan, plan to fail, and all that. So there should be something in your plan around how you're going to communicate, both who's going to make the decision, what you're going to communicate, and how you're going to do it. And that plan then needs to, really then be backed up by communications professionals. And by the reason I say the plan needs to be backed up, because communications planning is to a certain degree its own art. You need to think about which groups you're going to communicate with and how they want to be communicated with. The classic example is that everyone thinks about communicating with their customers and then sends a very dry legal customer notification, which isn't the same as how they normally communicate, that causes people, they get all the right stuff they need from a compliance perspective, but it feels a bit impersonal. They don't like it. And
seems conspicuous and the way that it's kind of like presented and unusual to make people
totally.
worry more almost.
Totally.
Yeah.
But I've also seen the other side of it where you get what's a marketing email disguised as a breach notification. You don't want to do that either. But the one that everyone seems to forget about is telling their staff internally, especially if you've got a widespread availability-based incident where people can't work. I mean, you need to be communicating to people. People are going to worry. People are going to worry about their jobs. People are going to worry about what's going on. People are then going to go and talk to their friends. That's how stuff kind of moves around. So think about those different stakeholder communities, how you're going to communicate within the right way, making sure you bring comms, marketing, PR, the people who normally communicate with your customers into the room to do those communications, but then manage it within a framework. And we did some research a while ago now that basically said the two things people were really, really wanted to know in a breach notification were, what's the impact going to means for me, and what am I going to lose financially? And so, as long as you're kind of ticking those boxes off, along with all the stuff you have to tell people, you're normally in a pretty good place. But you want that to be delivered in the right way.
So the take home message here is carefully manage your communications, plan them, but then obviously what is it they say? What is it Mike Tyson said? Everyone has a plan until you're punched in the face.
Yes, which is where most instant response plans immediately go out the window. I mean, we fail more people in exercises in the first 5 minutes and restart them because we'll run an exercise, no one gets the plan out, everyone just starts making decisions and shooting from the hip.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on, Joe, I think it's you again, but just because of your background and experience in insurance, but I've got a question for you around cyber insurance and incident response because we hear a lot of different things from our clients, and sometimes I think there's some sort of myths or misconceptions about cyber insurance and what it can and can't provide. So could you just shed some light on the myths about cyber insurance and incident response?
Yeah, no, happy to. And it's interesting because cyber insurance over the years has um, everyone has thoughts on cyber insurance. Very few people have ever dealt with it. And it doesn't stop people commenting, and you hear the first, I'd say, myth that I hear is cyber insurance never pays out. And that's often because people have had not great experiences with consumer insurance products. They tried to claim their home insurance, they've been in an accident and tried to claim their car insurance. And frankly, that ain't a great experience. But in the commercial insurance world, you don't exist very long as an insurer if you don't pay claims. And if you don't pay claims, people litigate. They don't just kind of write it off and move to somebody else next year. And so, insurers will pay valid claims. Now, they might not pay everything you want, and there might be an argument around what's in and what's out and that kind of stuff. But ultimately, insurers are going to pay a claim. But the key thing is, I often think is the other myth is that you're covered for everything. No, you do have to read and understand your policy, and your broker and your insurer will want to work with you to help you do that. And your broker's job in particular. And often, so you need to make sure, does the coverage you have actually match the incidents you think you're likely to see? Now, insurance isn't there to pay out based on every incident that you have. You need a level of fortuity. And also a level there of sizable impact to something. It's there for those large events that you perhaps wouldn't take major risk mitigation steps around, black swans or however you want to call them. And so, an example would be, you put good risk management in place to stop ransomware happening in the first place, instant response plan to deal with the immediate aftermath of it. But if your whole business is locked down because of a ransomware attack, that's what insurance is for. So therefore, if that is one of your scenarios, make sure your policy and coverage will respond to that. Also try and quantify that risk and make sure it will respond to the right kind of level. You don't want to have worked out that your likely exposure to ransomware is 5 million, have a policy for 1 million. You need to think about it kind of fiscally. And often the problems I see where you get that kind of tension around the not paying out is because actually what someone thought they were covered for is different from what they are covered for, or they're underinsured. The converse of that is you can also be overinsured and be therefore paying a premium for something that you don't need. So always involve your broker. They're there to help you. They, are good cyber expertise. Your insurer will also want to help as well. And the final point is when you have a tabletop exercise of your plan, which I always recommend, is make sure that you involve your insurance in that. Test whether they would respond to those scenarios. Insurers aren't a kind of a black box who will only talk to you in the event of a claim. They're a good open community, and would be happy to help.
So what I'm hearing from you there, Joe, is the sort of bottom line is engage with your insurer, make sure that that's part of your planning process, as we've been talking about a lot in this webinar.
Completely.
Right. Thank you very much. So moving on, we're going to talk about the regulator, Emily, and you're in the firing line for that, I'm afraid, given your background. So could you just let us know a little bit more about contacting the ICO and give us some examples of when you've done this before and how this has gone?
Absolutely. So yeah, everyone's favorite regulator to contact. So a key thing to be aware of is the ITO only need to be notified if the incident meets the threshold to be reported. And just very briefly, those are that if there is a risk to data subjects' rights for reporting to the regulator, and then the threshold for reporting to data subjects themselves is actually even higher. So it's where there is a high risk to their rights. And then exactly as Joe said earlier, in many cases, it can seem that an incident is serious, but actually when we look into it further, it doesn't meet the threshold to report. So one example of a matter that I worked on recently is that someone unfortunately accidentally sent a spreadsheet of 20,000 exam takers' information to another student. The concerning part of that being that the sheet included reasons why extra time was required, and therefore disclosed health data, including information about students' disabilities. So at first, this could seem really serious. It's a high volume of data, and it includes sensitive records. But once we dug into it a bit further, we could see that actually our client had good reason to believe the student the records were sent to could be trusted not to send it any further. And they'd also confirmed that they deleted the document. So there's always a risk that they could turn around and misuse it. But actually, at that stage, we decided it didn't meet the threshold to report. There wasn't a realistic risk to the individual's rights at that time.
Right. So tell us more about the what I'm hearing there from you, Emily, is that actually maybe people are slightly more sensitive to the what they perceive as being the regulations than perhaps the regulator perceives it.
Yeah, exactly that. So the ITO actually discourages over-reporting to data subjects. Their thinking being that if every single incident were reported, then we'd all get reporting fatigue. So if you get a message saying there's been a breach, you need to change your password or keep an eye out for any fraud on your bank account. If you're getting those like every week, you're going to stop noticing it. You're going to stop taking action. So the ICO's messaging is actually only report when it's necessary and when it meets those thresholds.
Great, very interesting. Thank you.
All right. Can I bring the threat intelligence and investigations angle into the loop here? So, Mark, as our complex investigation specialist, can you share with us some examples of how threat intelligence and investigations teams can support instant response?
Sure. As we're going through the webinar, I realise there's input for value for threat intelligence throughout this process, and I know that anyway. But there's sort of in general, there's three ways that threat intelligence, and for those of you that not aware of what threat intelligence means, it's basically understanding the adversaries. So looking at the attackers and how they do things to help your incident response or help your planning. So and the team at Mishcon here do a lot of that work as part of our incident response procedures. But there's three ways in general that threat intelligence can help with the incident response process. So it's preparation. So it's understanding how threat actors operate prior to prior to an incident. This is part of your planning process. You are looking at your threat model to see, what are what's the sector I'm in, what's the geography I'm in, what are the realistic threats against me, what do I have to care about? So, for example, some small businesses that have got a lot of intellectual property might be more concerned around sort of cyber espionage, and then some financial institutions might be more concerned about financial fraud, for example, and they'd be looking at those kind of threat actors who are, to protect against them. So there's that first stage, preparation. Then there's this sort of consuming of threat intelligence, like strategic threat intelligence, like what are the big threats that the world faces? What do we have to consider in that space? And then also sort of like tactical things like has this piece of malware been spotted, and how do I defend against it? Is there a new phishing a campaign that I can put on some detection rules to understand or to find these threats in my network? So that's the kind of detection stage of it, and then there's the actual incident response phase of it, in which our team are regularly employed to do that kind of work. And what I mean by that is, as an incident is progressing, we might be getting fed information from our forensics team to say we found this certain artifact, this I don't know, piece of software, or in some cases, evidence footprints, digital footprints that an attack has been somewhere. And then we will be looking to see, can we identify who that belongs to? Is this the hallmarks of a certain group? And then what can we do about that to help our incident responders find the evidence they need, or work out what's happened so that they can help our clients recover. I'll give you an example of that. Essentially, we had one case where we found, it was a ransomware case, we found a note. The note itself wasn't familiar. The group that had signed off the note weren't familiar to wasn't very available. But by searching that note against a repository, a library of notes, we were able to find it was actually linked to a ransomware group that had changed their name. So we were able to see some of their former kind of activities, their former TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures, like how they operate, and then help our, brief our incident response team to understand what to do about that. And that's the value in threat intelligence. It just speeds up your incident response, speeds up everything basically. So you're focusing on the priorities. That's what I'd say. Right. I think that brings us to the end of our session. Actually, it's a flash webinar, which is incredibly quick. So thank you very much for everybody for joining in. I'll just see if we've got any questions in our Q&A. One sec, we've got one question here for the panel. I think we've just got a little bit of time to do that. So someone's asking, are ransomware payments legal in the UK? So I don't know if anyone on the panel wants to take that one.
Well,
I can go on, Francisco. Do you want to jump in?
I was going to say that first and foremost, I'm an lawyer, so it's not a legal response. But in essence, I believe the payment in itself, it's not illegal. However, there are many considerations to be had before moving in that direction that should be considered and make sure you make an informed decision. And I think, Joe, you can detail on that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't comment on the kind of direct legality of paying it in the UK itself, but the one thing I can say is that the US in particular have taken quite clear steps to sanction in particular ransomware groups. There's I think there's a direction of travel there, which is that you shouldn't be, you'd be very buyer beware when you're paying those groups. You need to be very careful. Some particular addresses are sanctioned, but the groups overall are as well. So if you suspect that, through Mark's good threat intelligence, that's one of the groups you're dealing with, you definitely need to be aware. I worry about payments more broadly. I cast no judgment as to whether people pay or not. I think in some cases it's a good commercial decision, in other cases it's not. What I do worry about is the industry around paying ransoms. When someone is charging you a commission to make a ransomware payment or to negotiate, that doesn't feel like the alignment of incentives to me. That feels a little bit dodgy. And I worry about the connection between our industry and those groups in that case. So the payment process and unpacking it, you want to take legal advice, you want to take advice on the actual mechanism of payment and really think through how you're going to go about doing that negotiation. If paying is what you want to do, we do a whole webinar on the pay don't pay decision.
Yeah, it's there's some risks on there basically. So sanctions risk, there's terrorist financing risk, and just AML risks as well. So if you're making that payment, you do need to check out who you're making it to, and obviously sometimes that's not very clear. Right. Okay, I think that brings us to a close. So thank you very much to the panel. Thank you very much to everyone who's joined us. If you've got any outstanding questions, you can send them to us and we'll answer them by email. There will be a recording to all those who signed up. So thanks very much. And again, just a reminder, if you want to get in contact with the speakers directly, please click on the resources tab down below and you'll be taken to their bios and contact details. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.